Going back to pre-pandemic policies and politics won't solve the crises of our times or achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Young and experienced activists working on inequality, gender, and power from across the world will discuss the movements, voices, and policy agendas that can energize our work on the global goals.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SDG Action Zone. This is a session on reversing economic, gender, and power inequalities to supercharge the SDGs. My name's Danny Sriskandarajah. I'm Chief Executive of Oxfam, Great Britain. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you to what I think is one of the most important discussions that we'll hear in these weeks as world leaders come together virtually this year to talk about how to supercharge the Sustainable Development Goals, how to make sure that the coming 10 years are a decade of action. And for me, as someone who's been watching over the last decade or so as world leaders have designed and agreed the SDGs, it's been a relief to see inequality get such prominence in the SDGs. Few of us could have imagined that Goal 10, to reduce inequalities between and within countries, would feature as a prominent sustainable development goal. And it's been fulfilling to see that happen. But of course, the problem is that inequality in many ways around the world has been reversing. That pre-pandemic, we already saw that far too much of the world's wealth was locked in the hands of a relatively few people. 1% of the world's population owned more wealth than 6.9 billion people. Half of the world's population still lives on less than US $5.50 a day. And women in particular are more likely to be poor, more likely to be in low-paid work, more likely to be in precarious economic conditions. And of course, when you look at how the coronavirus pandemic has wreaked havoc on the lives and livelihoods of the poorest and most marginalized people around the planet, this really has become an issue of our generation. And what I hope we can do in this session is look at how we can use this moment of real disruption in world history to drive towards real transformation, towards fairer economies, fairer societies in which power is spread more equally. And one of the silver linings, a small silver lining of the dark cloud that is the coronavirus pandemic, is that it has allowed us to convene virtually and bring together people and voices that you might not see in the corridors of the United Nations in New York in a week like this. And I'm delighted that in this SDG Action Zone, we're able to bring together three amazing people, three amazing women who I respect hugely, who I hope will help us take us through this conversation. The first is Chioma Agwuegbo, who's the executive director of TechHerNG in Nigeria. And Chioma has been applying tech solutions to societal problems in Nigeria, but around the world. And she's been involved in a huge number of really important campaigns. Enough is Enough, Generation Voices, Occupy Nigeria, Bring Back Our Girls, and very recently, the state of emergency on GBV. And I'm glad that Chioma is joining us. She tweets at Chioma Chuka, if you'd like to connect with her on social media. We've also got Njoki, who's the Pan-Africa coordinator of the Fight Inequality Alliance. She's based in Kenya, but the Alliance has been a really important moment where different civil society organizations, trade unions, and other progressive voices have come together in recent years to focus on the importance of reducing inequality. And Njoki is a grassroots organizer and activist. She's been co-founder and executive director of Daughters of Mumbi Global Resource Center, an independent, non-ethnic, non-partisan Nairobi-based network. And she's also been previously director of 50 Years is Enough, the US Network for Global Economic Justice. Njoki tweets at Njehu on Twitter. And finally, a colleague of mine from the Oxfam network is Mercado, who's our regional director of Oxfam in Asia. Lan is a lifelong activist with over 30 years of experience working with civil society organizations, environmental movements, and international women's rights organization. And she's a really important part of Oxfam's work on this agenda, particularly our global advocacy on coronavirus and our campaigns on debt and a people's vaccine that I hope Lan can talk about. Lan tweets at Lan_Mercado. And I'm going to begin by perhaps to hear from each of you about what impacts you're seeing of this pandemic on inequality in the communities you live in the countries you work in. Chioma, perhaps we can start with you.
Thank you very much for that, Danny. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen as a young woman living in Nigeria as the effect of the corona pandemic has been the increase in sexual and gender-based violence in the country. So much that the United Nations, the UN Women in Nigeria tagged it the shadow pandemic. We've seen cases rise. We've seen the disparity in the ages of the survivors and the perpetrators just widen. I remember that in December, I went to film a mother whose 3-year-old had been raped by a 70-year-old man. And in addition to just struggling to grasp the horror that both the child and the mother had faced, it was the inability of this family to get justice. So the access to justice where families have been wronged, where children have been wronged, the absence of protections for vulnerable people in the state, all of these things have been exacerbated by COVID-19. We've seen, rising unemployment. We've seen the increase in petty theft. We've seen people actually stealing pots of food from the homes of other people. And so you have to, it makes me really torn. Yes, theft has occurred, but this is clearly theft, to stave off hunger. We've seen all of these things, just rise in the country. Nigeria currently has, the highest number of out-of-school children in the world. We've seen inequality deepened because quite a number of these children have no access to technology. And so while children all over the world, in some parts of Africa, are talking about taking Zoom classes, there's a class of children in Nigeria who have lost effectively 6 months of education because they are not connected to technology. They probably don't even have electricity. We've also seen cases where people have lost their jobs, people are poorer, people are hungrier. But coming back to sexual and gender-based violence, we've seen a lot of women and children locked up with their abusers. I can't begin to recount the number of horrible, horrible stories I've had to intervene on, or my friends who work as first responders have had to intervene on, because children who would normally get, abused once a week because they were going to school have now gotten abused every single day because they now have to, stay locked in with their abuser. So for me, the biggest impact has been the rise of sexual and gender-based violence in my community, in my city, and in my country.
Thanks very much, Chioma. Njoki?
Thank you. I'm glad to be part of this conversation. I think that with the COVID-19 pandemic, what I can say is that our families and our communities have suffered so much already this year. They have lost so much. So many lives have been lost. Livelihoods, people are going to bed hungry. People have lost jobs. But the encouraging thing is that people haven't lost hope. But I think what is really critical for me is that we actually should be talking about how we supercharge the fight against inequality, not how we supercharge the SDGs. We have seen a process and a system where that is designed to actually exclude. It's fatally flawed, and the system is designed to include inequality, to exclude women and youth, to violate the planet, to accumulate wealth for a few people and leave the rest out. So this is what we have seen in our communities of people suffering, whereas the wealthy were stockpiling toilet paper and other things. We have people who live hand to mouth, and they were really worried about what do they eat the next day versus how they stockpile luxuries like toilet paper and their favorite brand of wine or cheese or whatever.
Thank you, Njoki. And Lan, how does it feel in the Philippines?
I've been in quarantine since March, so that's a whole 6 months of not being able to go anywhere. And the Philippine economy has now entered recession. So the economy has shrunk by 16.5%. And that really illustrates how this COVID-19 pandemic is primarily a health crisis, but it has multiple dimensions that exacerbates pre-existing economic as well as social inequalities. I think what it has also exposed is where good governance makes a difference. But it's not just the Philippines. In Bangladesh, 1 million jobs were lost in the garment sector, and the vast majority of those were women. In across Southeast Asia and South Asia, hunger is on the rise, and the World Food Program estimates that if we don't do anything about this, then at the end of this current year, by the end of 2020, we could be facing a situation where 265 million people can go hungry. So across many different countries, and in Bangladesh, I'd like to mention how the Rohingya refugee people who were already in a crisis before the pandemic hit. It's just layer upon layer of crisis that's making their lives even more difficult. So we're seeing that the most affected are daily wage workers, people who are in the informal sector, many of whom are women, but also people who are already grappling with different forms of vulnerability even before this pandemic hit. And on gender inequality, we see that playing out in terms of the heavier workload that women carry on their shoulders, particularly care work for their families. But let's also not forget 70% of health workers are women providing care at the front line. And like Chioma said, violence against women, especially in the domestic violence, is a silent pandemic that's happening all across the world.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's really stark to hear from each of you how this pandemic, which some people talked about being the great leveler because every one of us is equally vulnerable, actually is leading to the great reversal in many ways. It's making the people who are at the margins of each of our societies worse off, more precarious, more vulnerable, and driving inequalities. And that's very worrying. I see it even, I live in the United Kingdom, one of the world's richest countries, and I can see that, Lan, you talked about 70% of care workers being women. Many of our care workers that we're rightly celebrating at this moment of national crisis are living below the poverty line, are in very difficult economic conditions. And so just at a time when we should be working to protect those workers, they're facing more dangerous conditions and at risk of greater poverty. And so this is a sort of universal challenge. But Njoki, you talked about not losing hope, and and this is the SDG Action Zone. I wonder if I could ask each of you to think about the last few months and identify an action that you've seen around you that inspires you, where people haven't lost hope, where people are using this moment to drive real change. Perhaps you can start, Chioma.
Thank you very much. I think all around us, we've seen, especially from young people, just deploy various, types of innovation to combat the crisis or to combat the effects of the crisis in their own simple way. We've seen people start to host Zoom classes. We've seen organizations, not only upskill themselves to be able to provide paid services, but also devote significant amounts of their services to people who would normally not be able to afford them. We've seen civil society organizations step up to provide palliatives to all sorts of people across different cadres of the society. We've seen groups, especially civil society groups, go out night and day. There's a particular organization, the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, going out night and day, especially when women have been abused, especially when children have been abused. You know, I've seen people rallying themselves together. The State of Emergency GBV campaign in Nigeria is a fantastic example of young people saying, despite the coronavirus, despite the restrictions, we're going to go out and we're going to ask our legislators and our police force and our governors to do something about the rising and extreme levels of sexual and gender-based violence in the country. We've seen people, you know, deploy all sorts of things, and it is so inspiring because these are people who are not exactly at the, you know, at the top of the food chain or anything. These are regular young people like me. And we're all just saying we cannot let these things happen. We're seeing young people organize towards elections that are currently happening in parts of the country as we speak. And I think the thing at the bottom of it is, this is my country. And regardless of the people that we have in power, we're not just going to sit by and watch things tank. We've seen, you know, Nigerians holding leaders to account. I think that's the biggest thing and the biggest point of inspiration for me in this time. It is that young people are saying, we won't let this country go astray. Things are bad enough. The virus has exacerbated, you know, issues as they currently appear, but we will speak. We will not stop speaking. We will not stop holding you accountable. We will not stop asking questions. I think for me, that's been the biggest move.
Thank you. Njoki?
Yes, as I say that for Fighting Equality Alliance, we do see and recognize that inequality is part of the design. It's part of the system. But the good news is that people are not waiting. People are not sitting back and despairing. They're busy redesigning the system. They're busy putting forward alternatives so that they can meet the needs of their families, their communities, and the planet. And really working hard to build the kind of world that they want, or that the kind of world that we want, and being clear about the kind of world we don't want. So an example that I can give was that in Kenya, when the pandemic hit, the government has every day done a briefing at 3 p.m. And those briefings until very recently were all done in English. So first of all, they're done at 3 p.m. when most people are at work, and in a language that most people could not understand or really quite comprehend. So we saw youth in the informal settlements, in the slums, use art or artivism, as we call it, to actually create these beautiful graffiti images that both beautified their communities in a time when it was dark and it was, you know, it was locked down and all of that. And with those graffiti, they were able to communicate these very complicated public health protocols to fight COVID-19. So we've seen people, young people step up and really innovate in the kinds of situations that they find themselves, not waiting for government, not waiting for civil society, but organizing organically and authentically to say, this is what our community needs, this is what we are going to do about it. And you can all come in and help, but we are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones who are going to take control and provide and make sure that our communities are safe and not more vulnerable than they already are.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lan, what inspires you?
Well, what really inspires me is seeing how people have sprung into action spontaneously at the community level. I know of examples in Iran, but also here in the Philippines, where communities have started feeding programs, so initiated by individuals to care for their neighbors, and private sector and other, it just created a movement at the community level, a movement of mutual aid and care. I think one other inspiring thing for me that builds on that is how community structures and community relationships are being reinvented. So here in the Philippines, we have small food producers up in the mountains, and they've just partnered with urban-based startups and established a food distribution system. And now people are buying directly from small food producers, bypassing large supermarkets and large, food distributors. So it's that solidarity at the community level that spontaneously happens is something that I draw inspiration from. But there's also solidarity happening at the global level, primarily around the people's vaccine. So this movement is rallying behind the rapid production, at scale of a vaccine that should be made available to everyone free of charge. And in Cambodia, where it's not very easy to, launch a campaign like that, they've been able to sign up 1 million citizens to support this vaccine. That has not happened before. And alongside that, of course, at the global level, activists are calling out, super rich people and corporations to fight against pandemic profiteering. So what I see is, this new movement of caring for each other, paying attention to each other's welfare, spontaneous acts of solidarity. I think these are the things that will get us through this crisis and also will be the foundation stones of creating a better future.
Great. Well, let's turn to those foundation stones, and thank you for those inspiring examples. So often in these meetings, we don't talk about what the positive stuff that we see. So thank you. But if we go to the foundation stone, how do we make this moment a moment for radical change? That, I think it's clear we all care about rising or deepening inequality. But I think we also see the potential for this to be a sort of generationally defining moment of radical change when it comes to gender and power and resources. What lessons do you have about how we make this a positive moment? Again, Chioma, let's start with you, perhaps.
Thank you very much. The first thing is the quality of leadership, and I'm going to speak to Africa as a whole. The quality of leadership on the continent needs to change, and it needs to change immediately. We need to build on our strengths. We need to build on the things that we've learned. Some schools of thought say that Africa is responding better to the pandemic because, we just went through Ebola a few years ago. Some countries are still trying to eradicate polio. So we have, quite a bit of recent experience with managing widespread illnesses and widespread diseases. But we need to apply these learnings not just to responding to COVID-19, but also to responding to the other parts of our societies that are diseased. For instance, education. Nigeria, for instance, has the highest out-of-school children in the world. Nigeria is also the country with the largest, swath of poor people, extremely poor people. What lessons can we learn from managing a global pandemic, right? How can we apply those lessons to managing education where we are failing, to managing poverty? We've had, my colleagues on this panel have talked about the rising numbers of unemployed. What are the solutions that we can transplant from managing sickness to managing people who are unemployed? I think that, we've come to a point where we have to tell ourselves the truth that we cannot entrepreneur ourselves out of poverty. We cannot keep talking about young people need to do this and young people need to do that. There is a place for the governments that we elected, right? We can't outsource leadership to the people who elected you to lead. And so for me, there's a very strong point, about leadership, and it's not just, at the national level, but it's also subnational. And this is why I keep coming back to citizens holding their leaders accountable, because it's one thing to talk and say the president isn't doing this and doing that, but they're subnational leaders and they're community leaders and they're traditional leaders and even religious leaders. Everybody has a role to play. And on the continent, we have the African Union and ECOWAS, who should be holding, the leaders on the continent to account, especially as it concerns things like democracy, inclusive governance, and governance that actually solves problems. A lot of the times I look at the continent and I do not see democracy that solves problems. I see democracy that's almost convenient and it's just a democracy in name. But we need to, this is an opportunity for us to press like a hard reset button on our systems and our structures and ensure that we truly deliver for the people we've been elected to lead. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Njoki?
Thank you. I think that what we need to do is to tackle inequality very directly in the ways that we know how to deal with it. Because we know the countries that have small gaps between the wealthy and the poor. And we know what kinds of policies they have implemented. So one of the things that I think is really important is that we need to tackle excessive profits. It's been noted that if Jeff Bezos gave $100 US to each and every one of his 876,000 employees, he would still have the same kind of wealth, the same level of wealth that he had before the pandemic. What does this mean? That while the rest of us are suffering, while people are going hungry, to bed hungry, while people are worried about health care for their families, there are people who are making a hell of a lot of money in this pandemic situation. And Jeff Bezos is one. The stock market is out of control. And yet people are suffering in the ways that they are suffering. So we know that wealth is not just about money, it is also about influence, it's about power, it's about access, it is about the ability to influence and corrupt democracy and all the things that we find very valuable in terms of the vision that we have for a better world. At the Fight Inequality Alliance global gathering, a woman, Patricia Perez from Chiapas, an indigenous woman, said to us, and I find that very encouraging and very instructive. She said, what you need to do is that if things change, you change your plan, not your dream. And this is what COVID-19 has done. It's changed the way we thought life would go on, but it has not changed the dream that we have for a better world, for an equal world, for a world where climate justice, where gender justice, where healthcare, education are universal. So we need to make sure that for the things that have been exposed as possible, we have been long told that universal health was not possible. Universal health care was not possible. But we have seen private hospitals be nationalized. We have seen governments offer free testing and treatment for COVID-19. We've seen governments suspend rents and mortgages and all kinds of things. These are the things that we know need to really change so that ordinary people, vulnerable people can actually be able to feel like they have a measure of control, a measure of hope in the life that they live. So what we see people saying is that they know the change and the things that they want. And what we are demanding from governments, what we are demanding from the UN system is a response. It is a support for the people who are saying, these are our ideas, these are our alternatives. So in the coming months, we will have people's assemblies that Fight Inequality Alliance is organizing, where people are articulating their dreams and their alternatives and their vision for a different world. We have seen movements, whether it's a Black Lives Matter movement, climate justice movement, we have seen people come forward and say, this is no longer acceptable. It has never been acceptable, but this is the line, and we say it stops here and it stops now. So we want to make sure that governments, that the UN, that civil society organizations are listening, are following what social movements are saying. Because in Chile, in Lebanon, in Haiti, in all of these places, people have been very, very clear about the system not working and what they want, and even in many places, creating a version, a reality of that world that they want.
Thank you. Let me just remind people, we're in the SDG Action Zone. This is reversing economic, gender and power inequalities to supercharge the SDGs. I'm Danny Sriskandarajah from Oxfam. We've been joined by Chioma Agwuegbo from TechHerNG, Njoki from the Pan-Africa Coordinator of the Fight Inequality Alliance, and Mercado, Oxfam's Regional Director in Asia. Jeff Bezos, if you happen to be watching, I hope you heard what Njoki just said. You could pay each of your workers at Amazon a $100,000 bonus and still have enough wealth, or still have more wealth than you did at the start of this pandemic. What a remarkable example of how unequally success and the benefits of success are being shared in today's economy. Lan, over to you on the question I've been asking everyone else. What needs to change to make sure this is we can make the most of this radical opportunity?
Well, just building on what Njoki said about pandemic profiteering, we need to also focus our eyes on how big pharma companies are aiming to profit from the vaccine. And that's one thing that definitely we need to stop, because calculations have suggested that providing the vaccine to around 375 million of the poorest people will actually cost big pharma companies less than 4 months of their profit, the top 10 pharma companies. So there is profiteering that needs to be stopped in many different areas. And I think this is the radical change that we need to make sure happens, because the pandemic has also exposed not just the enduring problems with the dominant economic system that promotes and perpetuates inequality. I think it has also pointed us to what is essential. And what's essential is really leveling off the playing field for a lot of people, for the majority of people. But the economic impact of COVID-19 will be its long tail. So inequality, we're really at risk of inequality continuing if we do not take radical action now. And I think that will happen, just building on what the other panelists have said, if we also shift our mindset from profits to the well-being of people. If we start caring more and if we start valuing more the welfare and well-being of people, especially those in need, that I think will start shifting not just systems, but also the way citizens appreciate relationships and see their role in that process of change. I mean, caring sounds very old-fashioned, very old school, but in a world that's dominated by profits, in a world that's driven by competition, in a world that's skewed towards the big and the dominant and the mighty, caring is probably a radical idea. And that also means starting to care about the work, valuing the work of women for forever, which has been marginalized and made invisible, and skew our values, skew our priorities towards supporting small businesses and ordinary people. And I just want to add to that activists, I think, have been very tired. Activists have not been spared by the pandemic crisis, and we all feel the exhaustion. But I think we need to keep persevering. We need to keep pushing, not just on these other issues, but one other issue I'd like to mention is debt cancellation. Because unless poor countries are able to get themselves out of the debt trap, then they will always scramble for resources that they need to invest in health systems, in education, to revamp the economy. And finally, in many countries, authoritarian regimes have used the pandemic as an excuse for increasing its assault on activists, on human defenders, on civil society organizations. We need to keep pushing to protect human rights and human rights defenders.
Great, thank you very much, Lan. I'm going to ask each of you about a message that you'd like to give to people who might be listening. I mean, one of the amazing things about the sort of Zoom revolution is that who knows who's watching this. I hope there'll be world leaders, business leaders, civil society activists, maybe the UN Secretary General will be watching this session. If you could give one of those people a key message about how to reduce inequality, what would that be? Chioma?
I think the first thing I'll say is that inequality, like bad behavior, is never a surprise thing. It's something that continues to build in little bits and bobs till it becomes something that's really, humongous. And so I'm speaking to citizens now, and I'm saying that we all have a role to play in reducing inequality around us, in reducing exclusion. And it's the simple things. It's protecting the person next to you. Lan talked a lot about care in such a beautiful way. It's reducing the inequalities around you. It's making room for the next person. It's ensuring that the person next to you doesn't suffer injustice simply because you're there. whether you know them or not, whether you're responsible for them or not. Those little actions have a way of reducing inequality. The other thing I'm going to say is that as a collective, our voices are so much stronger. If you look at the Not Too Young to Run campaign, which I steered communication for, young people were able to get sitting legislators to hold an emergency sitting to upturn a no that they had said before, because they said, you represent us and we want the Not Too Young to Run bill to pass. You cannot stand in the way of this bill. And by bringing their voices together and inducting this legislative into a hall of shame, they got legislators to do something. Young people this year, in response to the increasing incidents of sexual and gender-based violence, we came together in June and said we have to do something. And in 3 days, we started a series of protests around the country that got the federal government, state governments, the Nigerian governors from all to declare a state of emergency on GBV. And we've moved beyond that to engaging with the states to ensure that legislation is passed to protect vulnerable people. All of this to say that when people come together to say we want something to happen, you don't have to be popular, you don't have to be known. As long as you have a clear idea, this is the inequality I want to address, this is a societal issue I want to address, call your friends together, the same people you have drinks with. They are remarkable resources when it comes to pushing for change to happen. And I think that's where we need to be. And that's the word I want to leave for every young person and every citizen really of any country in the world who has watched this today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chioma. Njoki.
I think my message is to my fellow community activists and members, to all of us, to all of humanity, that the power to change our world lies in our very own hands. The changes that we have seen, whether it is basic income grants, cash transfers, whether it is universal healthcare access, even in limited situations as in the pandemic, what we need to do is to work to expand those gains and to make them permanent, so that more and more people are having access to that. The call to action is that we don't lose hope, that we keep fighting, that we keep doing what we are doing and doing it well, that we set the example and we actually demand from our governments the change that we want. Democracy is not about voting every so many years. We know this. We have seen this time and time again. Democracy is about everyday practice where we are defending our communities, where we are defending our rights, where we are defending the planet. Billionaire wealth and repressive governments have been supercharged by COVID-19. And we know that plutocracy and a pandemic are a deadly combination. So while our governments are busy coddling and getting close to billionaires, we are saying it is time to abolish billionaires. We are saying it is time for people and the planet to take first line in terms of what are the priorities that our governments, that the multilateral system puts forward, from the UN to the IFIs to all kinds of bodies that are out there that say they care about the planet that we live on. So our hope is built from the reality of what is going on and what is being fought for, which is dignity and progress. We can't wait. We can't think about 50-year plans and 20-year plans or even 10-year plans. It is about the here and now. Social solidarity, progressive taxes, the things that we know and we have seen deliver for people. Survival is resistance, and that is what communities are doing. That is what movements are doing, leading the way, giving examples, giving alternatives, and offering hope for each and every one of us, because we have seen things that we never thought possible, change and turn in a week, in a month, and certainly the things that we know today are not the things that we knew 6 months ago or 8 months ago when, for instance, the World Economic Forum happened. Then my message when I went to Davos was to say it's time to abolish billionaires. And there's nothing, in fact, there's more evidence that say time's up for billionaires. It is time for people and the planet to take supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Njoki. Lan.
Well, what more can I say? I mean, I think those are very powerful messages addressed to citizens and activists across the world. So I think what I'd like to add to that it's a message to national governments, regional intergovernmental bodies, and the UN that they need to make themselves relevant. The time is calling for radical change, and people are pushing for radical change, and will continue doing so. And we'd like to see the challenge taken up by national governments, by regional bodies, as well as the UN. And we've seen plenty of good examples where good governance has been put to practice and has made a difference. So I think my message to them, to governments at different levels and to big businesses, is to listen to the people's voices, and to work hand in hand with us in creating a beautiful, better future out of this crisis where we are in currently.
Thank you. Look, we are running out of time for this session. I could go on for hours. I think this has been a fascinating and sort of critical discussion, and refreshing in terms of some of the discussions I've had in and around the UN General Assembly and events like this. And for me, it was refreshing because I think each of you have talked about how important it will be to address structural issues that are driving inequality. This is the best moment we are likely to have to address an economy that is driving up inequality, that isn't sharing resources, wealth, success fairly, where, Lan, as you put it, where value needs to be recalibrated so that we can reward those people who are providing essential services, essential roles in our society. And it's if we're going to supercharge any of the SDGs, we need to make sure that the sort of economic structure that's the heart of the global economic order is one that drives towards fairness, and rather than ones that prevents that from happening. And I think that's a really important takeaway that I'm going to take from this this conversation. I was also really inspired to hear you all talk in different ways about the need for accountability, that enough time for talk, that politicians at every level, leaders need to show that they are acting and they need to show their relevance. And I think that's really important. Sometimes in these discussions, I hear warm words year in, year out, without this sense that we are all collectively responsible. If you're, the chances are if you're tuning into this session, you probably have some responsibility for supercharging the SDGs. And we all need to be held account for the role that we play or don't play. And I often used to say that one challenge is that I go to these discussions about the SDG, but I don't see anyone who's going to lose their job because they haven't done enough to pursue the SDGs. And unless you have that degree of real visceral accountability, I fear that we have a set of goals that don't have enough commitment. And if this is to be a decade of action, we need that accountability that goes with it. But most of all, what I'm going to take away from this session is the hope that each of you talked about, the fact that you can't let go of the dream, that there are people mobilizing, that yes, we need our leaders and our business leaders to take action, but really around the world, despite the challenges people are facing as a result of this pandemic, there is a momentum to change things fundamentally, that there is a sort of participation revolution going on. Chioma, you talked about young people, about women being much more involved, and that improves the quality of decision making, but also improves the quality of democracy, as Njoki, you put it. So I hope those of you who've been listening have got some inspiration there to help you supercharge your own work to reduce inequality, but also supercharge our own collective agenda on sustainable development. Please keep the conversation going online. There'll be lots of opportunities using social media to continue this discussion. If you need to reach out to any of us, please do so on social media. And all the best, very best for the rest of the UN General Assembly season, if you will. Thank you very much.